Mercedes has set the standards very high with a 1-2 finish in the inaugural race in Australia, and they do not seem to stop here. It seems like the Brackley-based squad has now found a way to prevent other teams from catching up, as Ferrari and Red Bull could be in big trouble regarding the process of closing the gap to Mercedes. Can Toto Wolff's team find a loophole? And more importantly, will making the car slower actually work in order to keep the rivals behind? There's a no question about it. Mercedes has done its homework for 2026. Whether we like it or not, their car seems like the most competitive one, at least on low downforce circuits, and the usage of the battery as well as the ICE power seems to be in perfect balance. However, the FIA had one thing clarified. We are not going to let a 2014-like scenario where Mercedes was the one who rushed away at the front and never looked back at their competition happen. That's why there is one very important rule that we need to mention here and how Mercedes is planning to circle around it. If a team's engine is between 2% and 4% off the best performing power unit, which in this case is Mercedes, then that team in question can bring one update after races 6, 12, and 18, while any engine that's more than 4% slower than the best power unit can bring 2 updates. And you'd think that Mercedes cannot run away with their dominance since the FIA has them by their necks with this rule, right? Think twice. Mercedes is now reportedly trying to reduce their winning margin compared to Ferrari and Red Bull so that they don't fall between that 2% and 4% category. The two teams that Mercedes have on their mind right now are Ferrari and Red Bull, because we've seen how competitive they are in Melbourne, as McLaren are still to prove themselves, while Aston Martin is just not a threat as we speak. If this is too hard to understand, I'll put it in easier terms for you. Mercedes is purposely going to be slower just to make sure that they won't be 2% faster than the rest of the competition. It's going to be a bit of a tricky landing if you ask us, because at the end of the day, you still get the risk of being overtaken in the engine development. So there is definitely a very small window for Mercedes to make this work. One area in which they managed to get a very good advantage is the fuel. This is the biggest difference between all teams. Mercedes uses Petronas's synthetic fuel, whereas Ferrari uses Shell's biomass fuel. The requirement from the FIA is clear: sustainable fuels. But an aspect in which Mercedes managed to get an advantage compared to their opponents is the fuel flow. This is essential during qualifying, and it provides them the much needed boost over one-lap performance. Furthermore, Antonelli and Russell did massive stints on hard tires, and the compression trick that they've come up with reduces the fuel consumption. So overall, the Brackley-based squad managed to build a lighter car, which translates to less degradation. Their direct opponent, Ferrari, has a distinct advantage off the line with their power unit, but when it comes to wheel-to-wheel racing, they appear to be a small step behind their rivals. And as we can see, Mercedes are in no mood to let their rivals catch up thanks to this infamous FIA rule. But just because Mercedes has a plan in place to sabotage their own advantage, it doesn't mean Ferrari is going to stand by and wait for something to drop out of the sky. Quite the contrary. The controversial 180-degree rear wing that was supposed to be introduced by round 7 in Canada is now being reportedly forced in China, or at least one part of it. According to Auto Racer, an Italian news outlet close to the Maranello-based squad, Ferrari is bringing 3 specs of their rear wing to Shanghai. There is no doubt that Ferrari is expecting a huge amount of performance out of this wing. But when we see the nature of Shanghai, especially the 1.2 kilometers long straight between turns 13 and 14, then I don't think any team other than Mercedes stands a good chance here. Sam Collins, an F1 analyst, spoke about the rear wing of Ferrari and how they can exploit its performance to greater lengths, potentially even motivating other teams to go in this direction. As he went on to say, the upper element of the rear wing, you can see it clearly when it goes back to corner mode. The wing has fully rotated around. Ferrari has discovered something quite clever in the regulations. It doesn't specify the wing has to be mounted the right way up when the active aero is deployed. Still, Vasseur was a bit skeptical when it came to introducing this rear wing in China, as he said that the team had only 1 week to go. But either way, the goal was to hurry up and get to Mercedes as soon as possible. Quite frankly, had it not been for the strategy screw-up by Ferrari in Melbourne, we would have seen a very interesting fight between the top 4. As far as Red Bull is concerned, the issue with the modern-day cars could extend to Max Verstappen retiring from the sport. The 4-time world champion has been very critical of what he's seen so far, calling the cars anti-racing ones and like Formula E on steroids. It's highly unusual to see Verstappen crash during qualifying in the manner that he did, which tells us only one thing: he has no control over the car. The same happened to Piastri during the opening lap, and be that as it may, Verstappen is not very keen on staying in F1 if it keeps developing in this direction. Elaborating further on this, he said, like I said, I love racing, but we can only take so much, right? I think they are willing to listen, FIA and F1. I just hope, of course, that there is some action. I mean, it's not that I am the only one saying it. I think a lot are saying it. If it's drivers or fans, we just want the best for the sport. It's not like we are critical just to be critical. We are critical for a reason. We want it to be F1, proper F1 on steroids. Today in Melbourne, that, of course, was, again, not the case. Lando Norris joined in this commentary of his 2025 championship rival, saying that F1 has gone from great to worse in a matter of 1 season. And you'll probably point out the fact that McLaren was dominant in a season where nobody else could catch up to them. And they weren't talking back then, but now the criticism is coming from many places, not just the affected teams and drivers. When talking about the 2026 cars, Norris said, I think everyone knows what the issues are. It's just the fact that it's a 50-50 split, and it just doesn't work. Straight line mode means you've got a lot of other issues at hand. You decelerate so much before corners, you have to lift everywhere to make sure the battery pack is at the top. If the pack's too high, you're also screwed. It doesn't feel good as a driver, but I'm sure George is smiling. We've come from the best cars ever made in Formula One and the nicest to drive to probably the worst. It sucks, but you have to live with it. But if you were to ask George Russell, then you'd understand that he doesn't actually care too much about the comments of his opponents, because if they were up there winning with the margin they did, then nobody would have commented from their side. Elaborating further on the hate that Russell's team received because of the dominance shown in round 1, especially from Lando Norris, Russell said, yeah, I don't know about Lando's comments. If he were winning, I don't think he'd be saying the same. You know, we weren't happy with how stiff the cars were last year and the porpoising, but everyone had a back issue and drivers were complaining about that. But McLaren said there was no porpoising, even though we watched their car and they were porpoising. Now McLaren has got the same engine as us, the same as Williams, and the same as Alpine. And so far, we've done a better job than they have. So that's just how the game goes. As of now, the advantage is in Mercedes' court. But the most important thing is to see whether the engine and battery development would truly catch up to them. If history taught us something, it's that we cannot judge by one race only. However, the general belief is that this will be an ICE competition, and Mercedes has thrown the gauntlet. Can they stay under the 2% development rate intentionally so that Ferrari and Red Bull will miss out on critical updates? And if they do so,